just for some background for folks who may not be fully familiar with Kickstarter. So we are best known as a crowdfunding platform for creative projects, and we work across 15 different creative disciplines. So that's art and music and film, as well as games and food, and of course design and tech that my team and I work with. And Kickstarter is turning 12 this spring, which is kind of hard to believe. And in that time, nearly 200,000 projects have successfully funded with the help of a community of around 20 million backers. And that represents more than $5.6 billion pledged to creative projects. So just one way to look at the impact Kickstarter's had. But another way that we think about it is, of course, like the opportunity for innovation and pushing change in these different industries that the people who are using Kickstarter can have. So Kickstarter is often a great place for innovation because an independent creator who is getting support from a community of folks who believe in what they're doing often has more freedom to experiment and try something new, more so than an established player. And we certainly see that with innovation in technology itself. So there have been breakthroughs in virtual reality and 3D printing and holographic displays even on Kickstarter. But significantly, and I think increasingly so, seeing innovation in environmental and sustainable approaches to manufacturing products. And that's really what we're talking about today, and have two experts in that field to hear from. And so, it's been really heartening and exciting to see designers on Kickstarter experimenting with new types of materials or even new types of business practices like sustainable or circular manufacturing. And so with that, I would like to hand it over to Ali Rose van Overbeke, who is the founder of Genusee, an eyewear company in Flint, Michigan. And she'll tell you a little bit about what they do and why they do it.
Thanks so much, Nick. Really appreciate all of the continued support from the Kickstarter community, and excited to start engaging with New Ink as well. Give me a second so I can get my screen shared with you all. Okay. So my name is Ali Rose, and I'm a huge evangelist for failure when it comes to designing for change. I'm also the founder of Genesee Eyewear. We are the first circular economy eyewear brand and manufacturer, making eyewear frames here in Flint, Michigan, from recycled single-use plastic water bottles that were a result of the Flint water crisis. And we launched through Kickstarter campaign in 2018. I want to share a bit with you guys about my story with sustainability and design specifically, because it's been perfectly imperfect. And if you would have told me a decade ago that I would, one, be an entrepreneur, two, living in Flint, Michigan and making eyewear from recycled water bottles, I would have definitely laughed at you. My early relationship with design, and more specifically fashion, was really superficial. I grew up in Metro Detroit, and I knew since second grade that I wanted to be a fashion designer, thanks to the Style Channel and Betsy Johnson. I ended up attending Parsons School of Design in NYC. It took me 8 years to get my BFA in fashion design, and I barely graduated at that. I failed 3 full semesters and had to completely redo them. I had multiple teachers tell me along that journey that I should be doing something else with my life and reconsider being a designer. And I actually got really physically sick in my early 20s while I was in college, which forced me to get to know myself and reevaluate my personal values in life, and how I wanted to really show up in the world as a human and a designer. And I think without that detour in my personal journey, I would not be where I am today in terms of sustainability. My last few years at Parsons, I was introduced to concepts like cradle to cradle, zero waste cutting, thanks to professors like Timo and Sarah Kozlowski. And it really started to reframe my relationship with fashion, physical products, and designing with sustainability first. I began exploring things like community collaborations to generate textiles with groups in Detroit, and upcycling fabric remnants and zero waste cutting. I thought when I graduated, I was going to end up working for like a Proenza or a Kelvin, a really creative fashion house, but I realized I needed to pay my bills. I wanted health insurance. So I went into more mass market fashion and landed at Lane Bryant and worked on their designer collaborations in emerging business categories, trying to revamp the brand, making it more millennial focused. That was really my first taste of also using fashion as a form of activism, getting to work for a brand that was changing the way that the world sees women's bodies in fashion and advertising, which was truly a dream come true. But like many young designers, what I thought I was going to be doing looked drastically different from what I was actually doing on the day-to-day. And working in mass market fashion, I also realized on the, behind the curtain, how unsustainable the linear model of the fashion industry truly was. The fact that corporations are collectively overproducing billions of garments that end up in landfill just didn't align with my values or make business sense to me at all either. I started asking questions like, why are we designing more stuff? And started believing that the world doesn't need more stuff, it needs more sustainable and inclusive systems. I went on a personal mission to find my why. And I, like every young millennial woman, somehow ended up in India doing the whole eat, love, pray thing. I was volunteering with an NGO in Hyderabad that retrains women who were in domestically abusive relationships with sewing skills. And that was my light bulb moment in knowing that I wanted to use fashion for good and work for a social enterprise. I flew back to Michigan on Christmas Day of 2016 with full intentions of breaking the news to my mom that I was selling everything I owned, moving to India to work for this NGO. But when I landed in Michigan, that was the height of the Flint water crisis. When state and federal aid was being deployed, it was all over the news. You couldn't look away. And I was going to be in Michigan for a couple of weeks with family. And I decided I was going to start volunteering with the American Red Cross in Flint, delivering cases of bottled water door to door. At the height of the water crisis, the city was using more than 20 million water bottles every single day, which was really due to failed leadership and, frankly, environmental racism. I, as a fashion designer, don't know how to solve a water crisis, but I know how to make things. And my designer brain went from seeing this waste stream of plastic, and I was curious if we could make something from it. And I started, more importantly, asking the community in Flint specifically, what does Flint need? And every single person I spoke with said jobs. So I knew we didn't just need to do a short-term art project or commentary on environmental racism and plastic waste as a result of this water crisis, but we needed to actually give the community what they were asking for and figure out a way to use this plastic that was generated by the water crisis to create jobs in the community. The initial idea for Genesee started with really simple, one goal in mind: to do good for people and planet. We looked to brands like Patagonia's B Corp model as a foundation. B Corps, unlike traditional corporations, look at triple bottom line returns to measure the true success of the business. So people, planet, profit. And Genesee's business plan started on a Post-it note in 2017 with 4 main goals of impact that have continued to be our guiding principles. So upcycling localized plastic, creating fair wage jobs, giving back to Flint, and encouraging a circular economy. We did 2 accelerator programs when I was still living in New York pre-launch, while I was still working full-time with XRC Labs, and then CFDA's Elaine Gold Launchpad, which allowed us to really scale this business plan from a Post-it note to a scalable business plan. And as a result of that, at the finality of our CFDA program, we said, we were going to launch Genusee eyewear through a Kickstarter campaign, which we did in April of 2018. And we didn't just successfully fund our project, but more importantly, we built a community of 829 individuals who voted with their dollars and said yes to our product and vision for the future of Flint. We received really amazing early nods of validation from New York Times and Vogue. And honestly, looking back now, that was 2018. I feel like that was the early transition of when we have really started to see a huge wave of brands who are not just launching, but embracing sustainability and social activism as a core value of their business as well. So this was amazing that we had, this validation from Vogue and New York Times, even pre-launch. Like, we didn't even have a physical product out in the world yet. All of the photos that we shot for our initial campaign with Kickstarter were 3D printed prototypes still. We did not have, our final injection molded prototypes, and we shot all the photos on Friends, and my roommate was the photographer. So really grassroots, and this is how it started. This, after funding our Kickstarter, I moved to Michigan full time. And this first space, we rented about 400 square feet in the back quadrant of our optical lab that we were working with, and made our first batch of orders that were delivered on time for our Kickstarter backers. And flash forward to today, and this is how it's going. We have, grown despite the pandemic, thankfully, from a team of 3 to a team of 7. And just last year, and this doesn't include obviously since 2018, but last year alone, we've upcycled more than 77,000 water bottles, have been able to maintain 7 full-time jobs, and we've been able to provide additional part-time and temporary employment for individuals in the community who are coming out of incarceration, individuals with disabilities, and we've done a lot of fundraising for the Flint Kids Fund here in Flint, which supports children and families who've been directly affected by lead poisoning from the water crisis. We did some fundraising for Fair Action Fight during the last election, and also raised funds for Flint women and girls through some collaborations. And this past year, more than ever, I mean, the brand really launched this way, but we've continued to embrace brand activism. And at the end of the day, a business is made up of people. And, brand activism, we see a lot of larger corporations embracing this, but it's not just about appearances. We really see it as a way of individually becoming better people as a team, to in turn influence the world and embody those values in a new impactful way of doing business that benefits all people. Our business model is focused around the circular economy. Traditionally, eyewear is manufactured in a way that 90% of the materials end up disposed of. Most eyewear is cellulose acetate. It's made through CNC cutting, which is a reductive process, versus our frames are injection molded, which is an additive process. And we are able to partner with our manufacturing partners to any breakage or wastage that happened throughout the manufacturing process. We're able to collect that, regrind, and reprocess that in our manufacturing process. So it's really zero waste. And then on a consumer-facing front, this is an infographic of what the circular economy is from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. But I think a lot of times on the consumer side, ideas like sustainability or circular economy are overwhelming. I look at this, and even someone like fully understanding what the circular economy is, and this is a part of my daily life, it's overwhelming. So we've really tried to employ business practices that make it more digestible for the consumer. So when we talk about the circular economy with our customer, we do that through something called our buyback program. So when the customer is done using their glasses, we can purchase them back for a discount off their next purchase and fully upcycle those glasses back into our material stream. And it's really our way as a brand of taking responsibility and accountability to partner with our customer with where the end use of their product ends up. And I'm gonna wrap things up, but overall, I would just say on this imperfect journey that we're all on is just looking for your why. I think first and foremost, and I don't have a background in business, but I think continuing to find the right team and build the right team around you to really execute on a vision and continue to build brands that are making real everyday impact, both socially and environmentally in the world around us. It's the future. And I think last year, more than anything, we've really seen exponential changes and even how customers are wanting to engage with brands, and everyone's becoming more vocal about their values and wanting to make sure they're aligning with brands that are embracing that as well.
Thank you so much, Ali Rose. Amazing. I already have so many questions, but first, let's hear from Krystal Persaud.
Great. And Ali, I also idolized Betsy Johnson. Probably, I feel like middle school, high school, she was really blowing up for us. Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Krystal. I'm the founder of Grouphug. A little bit about me. I love making things, so you guys will see a lot of pictures from my process. This is, yeah, there's me in a workshop being very happy. My favorite color is yellow, so I always like coordinate with tools, with certain tools. A little bit about me, I'm an industrial designer by trade, so I studied industrial design at Georgia Tech, and I am the former director of product at Little Bits, an educational tech startup based in New York. So I'm also like a electronics hardware geek, which you'll see a lot of too in my presentation. A little bit about Grouphug. So at Grouphug Solar, we like to say that we make ridiculously good looking solar panels. Here's an example. I'm going to get deeper into the product, but our first product is a designer solar panel that you can hang in your window and charge devices off the grid. And it's designed to look like part technology, part home decor. A bit about my journey. So I knew nothing about solar energy or the utility industry. I actually, like I mentioned, was a toy designer for about 6 years of my career right out of college. So I was doing things like designing like DIY electric guitars. My favorite project that I've ever worked on is designing a DIY build your own remote control R2D2, which is really, really fun and like peak nerdiness for me. But I actually decided to quit to focus on sustainability, even though it was probably the most fun job I've ever had. And the reason why I quit is because I found myself doing sustainable things every day and wanting to be more sustainable. I've always been passionate about the environment ever since college, but I could never find a way to sort of merge that passion with what I did every day for a living. And that was always a source of conflict for me. I try to do all of the things you're supposed to do. So I wear thrifted clothes, I have metal containers, I have the water bottles, I do all of the things. But it was really frustrating for me to figure out what to do when it came to renewable energy. And when you actually research the drivers of climate change, energy production is a huge driver. But I was wearing my thrifted sweater and then worrying about renewable energy, and something didn't connect for me. And when I had that realization, I immediately was like, oh, I'll just go out and buy a solar panel. Like, how hard could this really be? And then realizing, oh, I live in Brooklyn. Like, I don't own a house. I don't have access to my roof. I live in an apartment building like this. So what am I supposed to do? And it was really that like frustrating moment when I was trying to find a solution that it motivated me to start Grouphug. And that's where we really like to say that at Grouphug, we're your first step into solar energy when you might not own a home yet. You might be just starting off to figure out, what does solar energy even do? How does it work? And we can provide that hands-on intro for you. I always like showing this slide. This is a picture of the first commercial solar panel ever produced. It's from Bell Labs in New Jersey in the 50s. And every time I see it, I always laugh because they just look exactly the same today. And you would think that with something like solar technology, the look would be changing more rapidly. The price has dropped like 90% in the last 30 years, but the panels are essentially rectangles that get slapped on stuff. And that was another thing where I thought, why hasn't anyone really changed the way these things look? And I think, design is a key reason that the utility industry is typically not design focused. I think everybody can sort of guess that, but why not? Why aren't there more designers working in energy? And that was a big question that I had. I'm sharing with you a lot of process pictures of me figuring out how to make solar panels. So like I said, I went from designing electronic toys to being like, I'm going to build a solar panel. And I watched a ton of YouTube videos and tried to figure out what I was doing. So I think similar to Ali, if you asked me 3 years ago that I would be making solar panels, I would have been like, I don't think so. Like, probably not. And somehow that's where I am. So these are just pictures of solar cells from my process. And when I started off, these are some of the first prototypes I ever made. And these were really important because it led me to figuring out that I wanted to do a Kickstarter. This top one is actually the first solar panel I ever made. It didn't work at all, but I always like putting the picture in there because you don't always see those failed prototypes. And some of these other ones were explorations that I had. So solar necklaces, you can see some of my sketches of trying to figure out how to make solar maybe look like stained glass and look like something more interesting. And in my research, something that I found is that there are a lot of issues with solar manufacturing, and even on a small level, like camping solar panels and things like that, they're typically totally encased in epoxy, and all of the electronics are not usually accessible. And I think because of my background in electronics, I got really into e-waste and reducing e-waste. So this is a picture of one of our first prototypes. Actually, it like pains me to look at this because I can see all the cracks, all the cracks in my prototype that I never fixed. But it was a really important milestone for us before Kickstarter. A couple things that we are tackling in our product when it comes to design and product waste, we're using solar cells that are almost unbreakable. So you can see here in this picture, I had these a bit out of order. This is a picture of a solar cell. Typically, if a solar cell shatters, it's just gone. And there's a lot of, precious metal and minerals in there. We found a way to source solar cells that literally can't break. So if you look at this picture, I'm bending it and it's still staying together. So things like that, you can see here it's cracking. Opting to use wood and bamboo instead of plastic where possible so that it could be composted and shredded. One thing I'm really passionate about is modularity. I got that from my last job at Little Bits. So every single piece of the product comes apart and can be repaired, and there's no epoxy at all. And I think if anyone's into electronics, typically if you want something to say, there'll be epoxy and tape and glue, and we do everything so that it can be disassembled. And this is just in case anyone's not familiar with Little Bits. Basically, all of the circuits snap together, and our circuitry actually works almost the same way, that the battery, the circuit board, and the solar panel are all separate pieces. So what we do with customers, if something happens to their battery, if something happens to one specific piece of their circuit, we can actually just remove that one piece, repair it, and send it back. And everything else in the product stays the same. These are some pictures. You can actually see some of what I'm working on. These are some pictures of when I first got started. I was making a lot of this at my apartment. It's actually kind of funny how full circle that is, because now I'm back in my apartment because of COVID. So my process looks pretty similar today. But I thought you guys might enjoy seeing some of this process. Here's how like the circuit and the battery and the solar panel, I'm literally soldering the pieces together. After I made some of these and was able to sell it to friends and engage some interest, that's when I decided to do a Kickstarter. This is June 2019, so almost 2 years ago. I think similar to Ali, it was such a great experience because this is what I had. I didn't have mass production units. I was taking pictures like this that I hung. I happen to have a blue wall in my apartment. That's my apartment. I hung it up and took pictures. I went from soldering it to like literally throwing it on Kickstarter just to see what would happen. And we were able to raise over $70,000, which supported a lot of our first design and our first production. I thought this picture would be fun. This is back pre-COVID world, but we were able to have a party and invite all of our backers, where I got to meet a lot of people who supported our solar project for the first time in person. And I think it's that type of enthusiasm that people bring to Kickstarter, where, it was so much more than just the funding, where I got to meet people and actually answer their questions about solar and share my passion for it, which, I wouldn't have been able to do from my living room. I'll just share with you guys a little bit how the product works and things like that. So you can see it here hanging in the window. There's a built-in battery where you can plug in a USB cable to charge any device. One big surprise that happened right after Kickstarter is that I was on Shark Tank. So it was actually a fun fact is I never applied for Shark Tank. The producers actually saw my video on Kickstarter and invited me to come on. So about right after my Kickstarter campaign ended, I literally went on Shark Tank and filmed. I still didn't have production products. So 2019 was a really, really, really busy year for us. And yeah, all of these solar panels on the stage, I made them in my living room. There's I feel like you always think people have everything together, but I made all of those. And then finally, you know, after all of that, we were able to go through production. This is a picture of me at our warehouse in New Jersey, holding our first package that came out, which was really, really exciting. We have like 100% cardboard packaging that's all recyclable that the solar panel goes into. A few pictures of how it works. I actually want to skip through so you can see. Now, what's been exciting is that 2 years later, we've got thousands of customers all over the world charging different things with their solar chargers. My favorite one is actually this last one. Someone's playing their record player powered from their solar panel, which I think is the coolest thing I've seen so far. I know Newing people will recognize this picture, but what we have gotten some super fans, like this is a high school student, Aubrey, who is really excited that this is her first solar panel, and it's something actionable that she can do to offset some of her carbon footprint without, you know, needing a rooftop panel or needing to own a house. And that's really what we're trying to be for people. We want to cultivate this passion and love for solar or renewable energy at an early age so that they have this lifelong habit of adopting it, and there are options for you. And really just to hit that point home, I really think the future of energy needs creativity and not just utility. And we think about utility as being like a box on the wall or a company that we call when something's not working. But I think our relationship with energy will drastically change in the next 10 to 20 years to be more intimate and more personal and more, you know, flexible to what we actually want. And I wanted to share a couple projects just that are in the making, and I think we might potentially do on Kickstarter again, but one of the things we're known for is making custom shaped solar panels. So this is all things that we can do with a team here in New York. We also have factories that we work with to help make these. Solar Cat is probably our most famous one. It's a cat-shaped solar panel at the New York Hall of Science. And then we're also making a solar heart for a studio in New York. I think I've got one more picture. And I think our impact here is really getting people to think about solar and energy in a different way. Like what would get you excited to take a selfie with a solar panel? Like what if it's in the shape of a cat? And Solar Cat ended up being pre-COVID one of the most popular exhibits at NYSCI because I think the brilliant thing is sometimes people would look at it and not even realize that it's a solar panel. And I think that's really powerful because it just shows that there's so much work that could go into the design of the energy around us. Just a couple fun things. Me and my team, we're always really inspired by what's coming up in solar and energy. And there's so many possibilities. There's panda-shaped solar arrays, there's Mickey solar arrays, there's solar bikinis. I think like the possibilities are endless. And we have been working on pushing the design of our actual panels too. So this is a herringbone shaped panel that's inspired by, you know, fashion and architecture that we're working on where, you know, if I hadn't told you that was a solar panel, you might not have known. And then I wanted to end on a fun note. Coincidentally, rainbows, and it's St. Patrick's Day, which I didn't realize. But this is a rainbow solar panel that we're actually prototyping where it's similar to our existing panel, but with a special diffraction grating, and it can project rainbows in your room. So, you know, how can we make people associate renewable energy and solar in a really positive light, a pun intended? And, you know, if you thought of rainbows every time you saw a solar panel, I think that could make a big impact. And it's all about these daily perceptions and how they lead up to bigger changes. Thank you.
Thank you, Krystal. Thank you both so much. I love, I love seeing how the sort of access points into the work that you've been doing, and now that there's this opportunity for, you know, people to participate and to be the Audrey who's unboxing of the world, and the customers. Ali Rose, I know you have a lot of customer love. I've seen on the internet the customer love. So I guess just to think back, and I realized I had wanted to ask you about a piece of design inspiration, and then we talked about Betsy Johnson, and I guess maybe I mean, I think that is still something that I would love to know, but is there an object or a practice or you know, the way that both of your work does this individual empowering of the individual that I think is really special, and also very educational for people to think differently about what they buy, why they buy it, and what its impact is. There goes my dog. What for you like really got you thinking in terms of how an object correlates to systems change, or was there something that you came upon in your life that you're like, yes, this is it?
I've thought like the most about this question. This was the one that, like, when you sent the questions, that I've not struggled, but had the hardest time kind of articulating, because I think for me, I'm at such a point in my personal journey and my design journey that it's no longer about like physical objects. Like, I'm really fixated on this idea of like, why do we even have design schools anymore? We don't need to be making more stuff. Like, we need to actually be learning to like undesign like all this crap that, you know, is already existing. So I think the thing that more is like my driving force is more around my why, and the life experiences I've had and how my eyes have been open to more systemic issues around, inequality and oppression, and that as more of the design system that needs to be redesigned. And that I believe, though, that products can be a driving force for that kind of change in the world around us. And we often get asked, like, why glasses? Like, why'd you start with glasses? Because I mean, really, it could have been, a myriad of different objects. But, at the end of the day, we started with eyewear because it's a product of purpose and need. So I think first, as a designer, exploring categories that are physical products that we really do need as humans and individuals, and how do we make them better? How do we make sustainability more democratic and more accessible? We could have designed eyewear that was, $500, but our starting point is like 99. And that was really important for us to kind of reverse engineer making sustainability and things like the circular economy, like, more democratic, more accessible. And eyewear is also something you wear on your face. So it's the first thing you see. It's such a conversation starter. My favorite comment we get from customers is, oh, I get so many compliments on my glasses and I get to tell them your story. And it's like, exactly, like, that's the point, like, that it's something disruptive. It's right in your face. And, we are a brand that has so many core, values attached to it. And I think physical products can also often be an entry point for customers who might not already be there on their journey. But it's something, they're like, oh, I like this style, or this brand looks cool, or I like the branding. But as they start engaging with that brand, we're communicating with them more of our deeper core values around our why, around, creating more, jobs for the structurally unemployable, and the importance of sustainability and upcycling and circular economies. So I think a product can often be an entry point for like deeper conversations to have with our customer, but also the people that are interacting with them in the world around them.
Yeah, I love that you opened with, we don't need more stuff, right? And I think, I was hearing you talk about the face, and the face is this point of entry and conversation starter. And I think also, Krystal, you have this, like, purely elemental inroad to the function of your product is sunlight. And yeah, I'm curious if you feel similarly, and if the sort of conversation about systems change is right there in the product, and advocacy is right there in your customer.
Yeah, I definitely echo a lot of what Ali said. I think I did have this moment, though, in college that I remember very clearly, where I was going through industrial design school, and a lot of the projects are to make things. And I think, to Ali's point, like, we don't actually need that many things unless they do something very essential or very new or are very needed. And that is like the opposite of what design college is like. All of our assignments were like, make a high-end lamp, make a chair, make a this, make a that. And I found that really frustrating. And I remember getting an assignment that was like, make a luxury lamp. And I was just like, why? Like, why are you asking me to make this? Like, there are so many problems and so many issues. Like, I don't want to spend the next 4 weeks doing this. And I think it was being a designer and kind of part of the problem, realizing that I was like part of the problem, and that I should be really careful and really choosy about the things I introduce into the world, because that's a big responsibility.
Great. Well, it's so inspiring to hear you both talk about, how far you've come. I remember both of your Kickstarter campaigns very well. And, one thing we talk about at Kickstarter is like, our definition of success, like when somebody succeeds on Kickstarter, it's really the beginning of the process. It is not an end point. And I know you've both experienced that. And I'm curious, like flowing from that moment of kind of getting that go ahead and moving forward with producing the products, what were the kind of other moments that were turning points or other moments of success between, kickstarting the project and to the point where you've grown and where you are now?
I would say for us in our journey, I had like a preconceived idea that, we would do the Kickstarter and it would all be like up and to the right from there. And that's not the case. And it's definitely had its highs and like its low lows. And I think the only reason why we've made it this far is just in those low lows. I think, and I've talked to so many entrepreneurs, is it's so easy to give up in those moments, and it often on paper like looks like you should just give up. But I think the products and the companies and entrepreneurs that succeed are just the ones that are bullheaded enough to not give up in those moments. But the journey is, and there's so many memes out there now, about the entrepreneurial journey, but it's all over the place. And I think the one thing that I've really just gained more confidence in myself and in leading our team is our journey doesn't need to look like every other business that you're hearing out there about their success story. It's I feel like so often you only hear about these businesses that, in their first and second year are doing, millions of dollars and how quickly they're able to scale and quickly to grow. But, it might be actually smarter to grow a bit slower and more controlled, especially when you are, so focused around sustainability and impact, and that's also okay. And that we can define our own success, and it doesn't have to look like every other business. And really success is just the journey itself and making impact. It's like, if we had to close the business today, over the last 3 years, there's already been a considerable amount of impact that we've made with our current employees, with former employees, that, we've been able to provide a stepping stone for them in their journey and gaining employment and gaining work experience. I've mentioned when we launched, like we were specifically only hiring returning citizens, so individuals coming out of incarceration. And we've since, like, we still are biased towards hiring returning citizens, but have more of a mixed workforce currently. But a lot of those individuals that we worked with, we were their first legal job. And I think that in and of itself, I'm fine if we have to close up today, just knowing the individual impact that we've made in, a handful of individuals' lives that is getting them, further along in their personal journeys.
That's great. And Krystal, does anything stand out for you of a moment after the Kickstarter that was like, all right, now we have reached another level?
Yes, I feel like too many moments. And I think Ali's right. You tend to remember like the really high highs and the really low lows. And I think for us, just speaking honestly, like 2019 was like a totally insane year, like insane high year where we, I started the company, I did a Kickstarter, and it was like everything is going. And then 2020 was a really tough year for so many people, but it was a really tough year for us. And we had started a business channel where we were making custom shaped solar panels for like museums and restaurants. And all of those projects stopped, obviously, because of COVID. All of them closed, and this actually pains me. This is like, everyone here, this is therapy for me, because it actually pains me to talk about some of these things, because I think you really do have to be bullheaded to get through them, like Ali said. But we were actually going through manufacturing with our partners in March of 2020, and it just didn't happen because of COVID. So our manufacturing timeline was actually pushed like 6 months, and there was just nothing we could do about it. And we had tons of pre-orders and people emailing being like, where's my thing? And it just is a very stressful feeling. The thing I will say is that we had pre-orders on different platforms, and like for Kickstarter, I don't think any single backer canceled their pledge when I explained to them what was happening. Like, it's out of our control. We're doing everything we can, and this is what happened. And everyone was so supportive. It actually made me feel like a release, so much release of anxiety, just because the process of bringing a new product or process to life is so much more complicated than you think. And I think, Ali, I don't know if you agree, like if you knew how complicated it was, like would you have done it?
No, I was at a talk one time and I heard a woman say, like, being an entrepreneur is like being a parent. Like, if you knew what you were getting yourself into, like you probably wouldn't do it. And although I do have kids, like I really strongly like potentially agree with that comment. And I have a question for you too, Krystal. You guys have really good branding as well, and not, to be arrogant, but we have like decent branding. And do you feel like customers, you mentioned like how sassy, customers can get about like, where is my product sometimes. Do you guys ever experience that people have a perception of your brand that's not aligned with reality? Like they think you're a much larger company than you are. And I recently, like, we've been experiencing that a lot. Like, so sometimes I think people think we're, much, much, much bigger than we really are. And as consumers too, like, how do we like humanize our brands a bit more again?
Yeah.
So that customers remember, like, hey, like when you're sending demanding customer service messages, there's a human being on the other side of that conversation. And, especially the past year that we've all been through, I mean, it's affected everyone. And for some reason, I think a lot of times brands and small businesses kind of get the brunt of frustrations. And how do we get people to remember like that everyone's human at the end of the day?
Yeah, definitely. I think that is a challenge. And I think as businesses too, like the strategy that at least usually works for me is to just be completely honest and just be like, this is what happened. Like, how would you like me to help you? And I think people tend to appreciate that. But yeah, if you write into Grouphug customer service, I will probably answer it still, just because I actually enjoy answering it, because it's nice to see who's actually writing in. But after last year, I will never write into another company's customer service ever again, just because like I think it's just like a miracle if I order something and I get it on time. I'm like, oh my gosh, this company did such a great job, because you just see the other side of it so much.
I love that. I love this idea of humanizing the work and also still having cool branding,
Yeah, both. But we can do both things.
Like having a cool outfit. You can be a person in a cool outfit. Bringing it back to Betsy. So I'm curious because, I think I tend to agree with you, and I think there are others on this in the audience here who would probably tend to agree too, that the more stuff thing is one of the big challenges in the world of design. And yet, both of you are in this world where like systems changes is actually like it's a real part of the products that you're building. Not an imagined hopeful next step, but very much built into what you're doing. And imagining, the future designers, industrial designers, product creators out there who find a similar way to affect systems change. What have been the biggest surprises, pitfalls, things you wish you'd known about going into physical product design? And Krystal, you've talked a lot about manufacturing you know, wrenches that have been thrown in your path. And I think we've all seen wrenches thrown in the path of physical reality in the past year, for sure. But yeah, I'm just curious to know what lessons you've learned in that space.
Yeah, I think, especially, I think, maybe to summarize, I think that nothing is perfectly zero waste or like perfectly sustainable. And like the act of making anything at all is like a little unsustainable, like what Ali and I were talking about. So I think like really zoning in and controlling the areas that you can really control and do a good job. And then having a, like for me, having a plan to help improve other things, but just knowing that not every, you know, I feel like cynical saying this, but like not every process material will be 100% perfect. And I think that's one of the things that's frustrating to really like calculate how sustainable something is, right? Because a material could be perfectly sustainable, but then maybe the ethics and labor behind it are not, and then you're like, that's not really sustainable. So it's there's so many factors. But I think for me, the thing that I really try to do is like we really lean into repair and modularity and like e-waste and the things that we can really control, and then try to educate and improve the things that are not totally in our control. I think one of the frustrating processes I went through, another frustrating process I went through this year was I've been trying to find a more local factory within my area to like help me produce my solar panels, and just like absolutely no one wants to do it. And I think it's such a specific job, and it's, you know, it's tough. And Ali, I'm sure you've experienced a similar thing. It takes a lot of perseverance to like convince someone and explain why and how. And yeah, if anyone knows any solar factories in New York, call me. I've been trying to get in touch with some of them, but yeah, I think it's like the process is a constant improvement. It's never perfect.
I would echo that 100%. I think as individuals, as companies, like we have to remember the sustainability journey. It is a journey. It's not a destination. And, you know, there will always be room for improvement, especially as, you know, research and technology continue to improve, and there's constantly new innovation. So there will always be room to improve. And that to me is what's the most exciting part about it. Is that we can continue to get better. But I think first it's like you have to start somewhere, like just start imperfectly and continue to, you know, pivot and improve. And I think a starting point for that is, you know, as making sure that your impact is measurable. I think even though I'm more of a creative, you know, design-based person, I love data points and I love numbers. So being able to see improvement and progression, and even if it's just starting with one area of impact that you as an individual or business want to make, just start somewhere and start measuring it and continue to improve. And I think having transparency as brands with our customers and building trust first and foremost is crucial in building community, you know, both for us as a brand here locally in the community that we work within, but also, you know, more of our outward like customer community as well.
Love that. Yeah, I love it when the answer is in trust through actual results. That's, you know, that's very, very smart, and also a layer of rigor that I think is, you know, it's very refreshing to see that as built into your work. We have a cool question from Neil, and Neil, if you don't mind, I would love for you to say it out loud. In part because I think that you're getting at something really interesting, and also in part because I want to hear from you. Hi, Neil.
Okay, Kelsa. Hi, Kelsa. Hello, everybody, and thank you, Krystal and Ali. This is terrific. So let me find my question and get to it. This is for both of you, one of you, however you want to deal with it. But my question is, do you think there's an opportunity, and this is to do with nomenclature, I suppose, wording, is there an opportunity to further the mission if the word design or designer, when it's introduced to the general public, if it's sort of without the common notion of making things look pretty, or as you've mentioned, the idea of a designer just makes objects, makes things. So if you say I'm a designer, the assumption is there should be an object, and the other assumption, general public, is it's pretty. End of question.
I can kind of start. I think a lot of it comes down to, and I think it's happening. I think there's a shift in the current, cohort of designers, shifting away. I look at a lot of people, for instance, that I know from the fashion design community, and just the huge shifts that they're making, and not boxing themselves in anymore as designers and in just fashion. And I do think, every person is a designer. Like, we're designing the life, we design our home, the objects that we choose to purchase and consume are, designing a lifestyle. So I think a lot of it comes down to a slow progression of redefining, I guess, that definition of what a designer is and what a designer does. I think, me personally, I no longer think of designer as just, a person who makes objects that are pretty. I think of designers who are reimagining, new societal structures and systems and new policies and politics. To me, like, that is also a form of design. And I'm optimistic that as a society, like, we are moving more towards that general acceptance and personal accountability that we are all designers and designing something, whether that's a physical product or a system.
Love that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm in total agreement. I was sparing my opinion, but I'm in total agreement in terms of, I don't call myself a designer, but I design processes and systems. Ask me to make an object, not really happening. I have a couple, but I'll tweak with a system and a process all day long, even if it's one that works, which is what I do. I don't care if it works or not. I look for another way of doing it.
I think too, there's like a new term that I heard recently through one of my friends. He typically is considered like an operator, and he has more design thinking, and he calls himself a creative operator, which I love, because it's like, you think of operations and even business organization, that is a form of design. You're designing a system of which your business operates within. You're designing an organizational system. That's all a form of design.
And there's a parallel. I'm a creative economist, so
I love that.
Same idea.
And I can jump in just super quickly with a quick thought. I do think there's a huge opportunity just in education, and I'm sure a lot of people would agree that there's this immense pressure when you're in high school to like pick a career and you learn about careers. And I didn't know anything about design. I didn't know design existed. I didn't know industrial design existed. And I think, even, this is embarrassing to admit, I think even to this day, I'm not sure my parents really know what I studied in college, to be honest. Like, it's always, I went to Georgia Tech, so I've heard them refer to me as an engineer, and I'm not technically an engineer, but I think design can be that. And I think there is a baseline literacy of what is this field and what does this mean. And I know when I was choosing colleges, I was creative, but I was interested in solving problems and being a little technical. And I thought the options were art school or engineering school, or art school or studying science. And I think there's a lot to be said about just telling people what's out there and what the opportunity is at an earlier age.
Thank you, Krystal. And you were kind of a catalyst to the question, because you mentioned in design school, they asked you to make objects and luxury items. So within a system, I see that as promoting that very idea of what a design or designer is, even to the individuals they're teaching design to. So then, it starts a lot, very much, I think, with the institutions that are teaching And
Absolutely.
despite filling seats and getting tuition revenue for whatever people want to come, I think they can expand the idea and maybe empower individuals if they understood that design has many uses besides a luxury lamp and a furniture or something of that nature. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Ali.
Thank you, Neil. I love that question, and I love also the cracking open of these disciplines. I want to invite, we're getting close to our time, so folks who still have questions lingering, please get them in the chat. I'm seeing Wendy's insertion of post-industrial design. I love that. And also want to make sure we touch on this, this I think really important question from Julian around how manufacturing is a polluting process, and how your experience has been in finding ethical partners. And Julian, feel free to also chime in if you have more you want to add. Okay, I'll toss over to you, Krystal and Ali Rose.
For us, we kind of created like our own little like box starting off. Like our focus has been on obviously manufacturing in Flint and more locally here in Michigan. Our majority of our supply chain is within a 180-mile radius of Flint, which is incredibly unique. So that already reduces the partners that we can work with. And treating our manufacturing partners more like true partnerships and building relationship early on before we even sign up for anything. And I think in Michigan specifically, we've the manufacturing partners we work with typically have a history of working in automotive manufacturing. And for instance, our injection molder, we approached them about manufacturing eyewear. They had never done eyewear. They were on board to figuring it out with us, but they weren't originally set up for more of the zero waste manufacturing that we had intentions of doing. So to me, it's exciting because we got to go to this partner that's been doing business one way for so long, and the breakage and the wastage and injection molding, there's something called like a carrier part that typically gets thrown away in that process. I asked them, what do the other companies you work with do, which are all, the large automotive companies. Are like, well, that just gets thrown away. I'm like, well, we need you to collect it and we're going to regrind it and continue to use it in our process. And so in turn, we're pushing them to start thinking about things differently and thinking about sustainability. And the longer term goal would obviously be that that's something that they can scale to much larger manufacturing partners that they even work with, and kind of gives them food for thought as well. And I think for us, it's a bit easier as well that our supply chain is so local, because we do have direct relationships with every single one of those. Like I know the person, we often do, there's more hand-to-hand exchange of goods instead of it, being shipped overseas. If we have an order of, polishing bags from the New Life Center that we work with, often, they're 2 miles away. We drive over there and pick it up. Our optical lab is a mile away from where we manufacture our frames. And, so there's daily trips and hand exchange of goods that's happening, which makes, the supply chain more human, and we know their practices and have hopefully also been able to influence them in more positive ways.
And just to add on from my perspective, I think it's frustrating. Manufacturing electronics sustainably is really, really difficult. There's a lot of materials involved, and it's been an interesting process. I think I totally echo Ali on finding partners that you can really personally talk to every day and explain what you're trying to do. And I think for us, what has happened a couple times is we've shared designs with manufacturing partners, and they've come back with suggestions, and it's 100% always the cheapest least sustainable suggestion, just because they think that's what we want as a business. So like our circuit boards are much more expensive than they could be, but then they're not repairable. And they're always like, why don't you just make this one board and we'll glue it in? And we're like, no, like that's not what we want to do. We want to do it this way. And they're like, that's going to add X amount of money. And we're like, that's okay. Like, we're okay with that. And I think for them, like, they're used to seeing the bottom line as money and they want to get you the best price, but that's not always what we want, what I want. So it's like having, being able to have that conversation.
That's great.
Oh wait,
Julian,
is Julian raising his hand?
are you waving or talk to us?
Okay, I'm going to talk. I think it's so challenging, and what you're doing in terms of the local relationships is amazing. But to the point about education, I think design as a system has to engage the entirety in the manufacturing process, the sourcing of the materials. So in terms of a bigger system, the education must inform the manufacturing process. So to use the word designer, I know it's got a bit of a bad rep, but if you help to design a manufacturing process and scale outwardly to get that process on board, then you will have more control. Conversations are great, and informing the manufacturer about the process that you want in terms of sustainability is very important. But to get a full closed system manufacturing process with material sourcing and production is going to be key to the future of, sharing sustainable circular economy and closed loop design systems. I think that's what I'm getting at. I think the ideas are wonderful, but it's that relationship and the education with the manufacturers that we need to create sustainable systems and sustainable future designs. And that's all I wanted to add.
No, I completely agree with that. And I think about, a few of our manufacturing partners that we've really pushed with our asks of, how we want them to conduct doing business with us. For instance, our injection molder, they collect our, any breakage, they collect the carrier pieces, and, we regrind those. And I think it's exciting to me because I think they're making these changes because I do know it's of more cost to them, it's of more time. And I do think they are acknowledging and realizing that there is a shift in this larger industrial manufacturing where they're realizing, oh shit, if we don't start doing this, like we're going to be losing business, because this is the future of, manufacturing. And what better way to use, the smaller companies, as a case study of like figuring this out at smaller, so that then they can scale it to the larger companies that are going to be having these much larger asks of them to pivot their practices.
Thank you for that. And just in the interest of time, I want us to wrap. And before we do, really quickly, maybe in a sentence or two, Gabriel asks a rich and dense and meaty question here. But if you could speak to either the pivot out of graphic design into industrial, or whether industrial design can be entered as a self-taught designer.
So I think one of the amazing things about the design field is that you can be self-taught. And you can practice and, explore projects that you want. And whether, I think as we've talked about today, the definition of design is also fluid and changes. So I went a very traditional route where I happened to know this is what I wanted to do and I studied it. But I have a lot of friends and colleagues who do not have a formal background. And I think it's one of those things that if you start doing it, you are a designer, and you don't need a certificate and you don't need a degree to tell you that.
Love that. It's a wonderful way for us to close. Thank you all so much for being here and for sharing your attention and your thoughts and your questions. Please keep in touch with Kickstarter, with New Ink. Reminder that our open call is live through April 20th. Would love to answer questions or hear from all of you. Again, we have an open house program coming up 2 weeks from today, same time, same place, where we'll be opening our virtual doors to help you understand more about our program and if it's right for you. Nick, folks at Kickstarter, Krystal, Ali Rose, thank you so much for your participation and for telling your stories. The